You're at law school now. You're doing that at night. What are you working? What are you doing as a job during the day?
I'm working as a systems analyst for a company that no longer exists. It was called Logica. It was quite big at the time. It was a sort of dot-com boom software company. And it was fine, and I was earning good money and saving. I had enough, earning enough to save for a house deposit. It was okay, but I wasn't there in the, hierarchy of fulfillment.
Right. And so you went to law school and part-time, and you found that compelling intellectually, but you also, is that where you ran across your leftist nemesis and first started to understand what the pathologies of postmodernism, that kind of sly Marxism that's a part of that? And why did that strike you so intensely? Like, you tangled that together a little bit in your self-description with that bigotry of low expectations that you encountered with the more leftist teachers. And so that's all percolating, but it sounds to me like there were some actual striking experiences that perhaps you had in law school that politicized you. And it also sounds like your politicization in part was, at least initially, I definitely don't want that. Right.
Yes.
So
very
much.
Very much so.
Well, so let's walk through that. So because I'd like to disentangle that. There's the bigotry of low expectations that you described, and that deviation that you had in your academic striving in consequence. And now you're at law school. And what are you seeing among the leftist students there, and why is that raising your hackles?
So actually, what I saw started before law school, but I just couldn't define it. It was the stuff that I saw when I was studying engineering with those students. That was the first degree. And I had just a very dim view of a lot of the students studying the humanities courses, because they didn't need to work as hard as those of us studying engineering. I think I had about 26 hours of, teaching time and lab time. We were in the laboratory all the time. And then you had these people studying arts, and they were all sort of, just messing around all the time. They were acting plays and having lots of fun and going on demonstrations and protests. And I thought, where do they have time for this? And they were all so sort of smug and condescending. So I realized, well, I don't like this. And because I have the self-confidence of growing up in a relatively wealthy family, I don't feel intimidated by them. And I challenge them. I have arguments with them, and they lose and they get angry. And I think that they are just very weak people who don't like argument, and they say things like, well, you can't say that. Or how can you say that? You're black. You should know that, all these people are racist and we're just trying to be helpful and so on. And they were so condescending. So I know I don't like that. I also know that I don't like teachers who just set very low expectations. I'm learning that family has actually been the most important thing in making me who I am. And I didn't realize that long enough. So all of these things are taking me on the journey to conservatism. Then I do the law degree, where I'm reading about John Stuart Mill and Edmund Burke, and, how the rule of law is so critical to, the West, but how this country functions. And you learn the power of institutions. You see how you need to preserve institutions from generation to generation. You then compare with what happened during the colonial era, where institutions are brought and, dropped in a place. And so, yes, there's now a common law tradition, but the culture hasn't really changed, and eventually the culture erodes it. So a lot of it is personal experience and observation, and lots of arguing. So I loved arguing, loved debating. And I remember when I was in that job working as a systems analysis, there was a lefty French guy who worked with me. And he kept saying, you are so right-wing, you are so right-wing. And I didn't know enough then. And I said, no, I'm not right-wing, because right-wing, as I had been taught, was a bad thing. The media and the cultural establishment always used right-wing as a pejorative term. So I would say, no, I'm not right-wing, but I was. And I remember when I really sat down and read the canon and the text, and, you read Hayek and, of course, Thomas Sowell, who I love very much, I realized, oh my goodness, I'm very right-wing. And I'm proud of that. This is not something to be embarrassed or ashamed about. And my being very much on the right is that mix of the cultural conservatism, because I want us to preserve the things that are amazing here. And one of the things that is amazing is the classic liberalism, not the postmodern, sort of corruption of that. And a lot of what I see that has gone wrong is the corruption of liberalism. And I gave a speech in December where I said liberalism has been hacked, that people have found the weakest points and are twisting it to do things it shouldn't be doing. And you need muscular liberals to defend their turf. And instead, what they've been doing is giving away their turf. And that is how we ended up with a lot of the extreme gender ideology coming into play, because it wore the clothes of the gay rights movement. It's nothing like that. And that's how we saw a lot of the craziness of critical race theory, the BLM movement, set race relations in a terrible negative territory. But it wore the clothes of the civil rights movement. And you need people who are in touch with reality, who can say, no, this is not real, this is not true. And I think that is something which I am lucky to have, that I just don't get detached from everyday life. I know what is real and what isn't. And I am amazed that we have politicians, including the British Prime Minister, who will say things like 99% of women don't have a penis, as if 1% of women do. And if a politician is prepared to tell you something that we all know is not true, then what else will they tell you?
Even creatures without nervous systems can distinguish between the sexes. And so, yeah, there's something very pathological going on there.